Welcome to CFO Talk. I'm your host, Steve Rosewald, Chief Learning Officer at CFO University. Joining us today is Andy Burrows, the founder of Supercharge Finance, an online training and coaching platform Andy uses to help finance professionals grow and work more effectively. Last year, Andy delivered a talk that described how the business-focused finance leader is the stepping stone to the CFO role, and building a business-focused finance team, a key to CFO success. Welcome, Andy. It's great to have you on the show.
As always, it's great to have the opportunity to chat with you, Steve.
Yeah, we have such a good time. We've done a whole bunch of these, and we always seem to have a great time. And occasionally, we really shed some great light on things. Last year at Finex, I really enjoyed your business-focused finance leader talk. But you mentioned kind of some qualities that make up business-focused finance leader. Can you remind us what those were?
The way I explain it really is that a business-focused finance leader, or a CFO, if you like, if a CFO is a business leader. So I take those two words and say it's about business and about leadership. You have to have business acumen. You have to know about the business, understand the business, be able to help the business. In order to do that, you have to be a leader. You have to lead your team, your finance team, effectively, to also be business focused, but you're also leading the business as well in how to improve performance. So it's about business acumen, it's about leadership, and all that sits on top of what I call tools and techniques. It's our expertise as finance professionals, really. Some of it's FP&A, some of it's Treasury, some of it's accounting, but that business leadership wouldn't get very far if we weren't any good at finance.
There's this technical and tool piece that we all kind of grow up in and hone when we start our first jobs. And there's, the business acumen piece that really you have to work hard at, right? It's not necessarily something you get without walking the shop floor and stuff. And then the leadership side is something that needs to be practiced too. So I really like the kind of the stool you've set up for this whole business-focused finance leader. One of the things you mentioned in the Finex talk, in our Finex talk, was that the transformation process, we have too much focus on finance transformation. And you kind of, called people out for, hey, there's a better way to do this, or a more effective way, a more important way. Can you remind us what that involves?
The reason I talk about business-focused finance is because I see so much finance working as a silo, being very internally focused. And that even happens in finance organizations that think they are business focused. But the example I use is when we do finance transformations, all we're trying to do is to be cheaper. We're trying to save costs. We're trying to outsource to save costs. We're trying to put new systems in and robotics to be cheaper. If you define effectiveness, it's how well you meet your objectives. And so that makes you think, well, what are my objectives in finance? And if we set the objectives as finance in terms of how we help the business, then our transformation then becomes, how can we better help the business and not how can we be cheaper? I mean, being cheaper isn't the only way of helping the business. We have lots of skills and expertise that can help the business, create value and leverage value.
We're all business focused, right? You wouldn't talk to any CFO and say, oh, I'm not business focused. Yet, how do we do that self-assessment? Because as you point out, a lot of times we're pretty navel gazing, looking at our own finance teams and how to improve that and kind of missing the bigger picture of the business. Can you tell us about some ideas on either doing a self-assessment, or how do we know if we are business focused versus just finance focused?
Fundamentally, you've got to get feedback from your business colleagues about how supported they feel and how challenged they feel by what we do as finance professionals. And we've got to challenge ourselves. We've got to really be honest with ourselves. And the two examples that I gave in the talk that really challenge is kind of things like an example I had. I put in a new invoice processing system once. I project managed it, and it was a really whiz-wow system, scanning in invoices, reading them by optical character recognition, automatically coding them, and then sending them through the workflow. The trouble was we forgot to consult our procurement function, or we consulted them too late and we made a design decision that actually made their lives a lot harder. And to say that they were annoyed is rather an understatement. So it's all because we had that siloed thought. We thought we were doing a great job for finance, simplifying and making it more efficient, but actually we made it harder for the business. So I guess the way to benchmark there is, what impact are we having on the business? Are we making it harder or easier? And what's our job to do? Surely our job in those processing areas is to make the lives of the business people easier so that they can focus on their own jobs. The other example I used was, I kind of think it's a bit of a fad sometimes, this whole thing about self-service reporting. So that, people think it's great that we can give the business self-service reporting capability. But what that actually means is that we're foisting on the business hours and hours of messing around with wondering what fields to add into a report and how to filter them and how to do query building. And so we're actually wasting their time. And the other thing we're doing is removing ourselves as the middleman so we don't get to have business-focused conversations with them. I see it as kind of shooting ourselves in the foot as well as shooting the business in the head. So it's sort of...
Two really
maybe
great
not quite. Maybe not quite.
Well, no, the invoicing example, you started talking about all the benefits, and I'm going, wow, this is going to be incredible. And you listen to that from a finance perspective, you're going, yeah, of course you're going to. You must have been a hero. And then you point out, well, yeah, we forgot to talk to some of the people that were important in the process. And self-service, that has this, it's a term that, yeah, we love to throw around, and people love to hear it. But until you actually get into it, and you actually highlight two really problem areas potentially with that. And one is heaping a lot more work on them. And the other is removing ourselves from being a really value-added finance business partner, because now we're going to throw stuff over the wall and not really see what the business is doing. So, one thing, and this is really controversial, but can't wait to hear your answer on this, but you challenge the role, or the term, I should say, finance business partner, as not necessarily being something we should strive for. So go ahead and be controversial in your response.
I guess I don't like the terminology, really, finance business partner, because it gives you this impression that there's the business over here and there's finance over here, and finance come along and say to the business, can we partner with you? Or the business come along and say, hey, finance, do you want to partner with us? And that's just absurd. Finance is part of the business. We're not separate from it. It's not like we have to ask permission to be part of the business. The business can't run without us. In fact, the business can't run without any part of the business. Let's just not just big up finance. The business couldn't run without HR or operations or marketing. So it's no point anybody finger pointing and saying, oh, you can partner with us today.
Well, this will be very controversial, right? But I agree, and I looked at it from when that term first became really popular in the U.S., which really came out of Europe and kind of the way Europe looks at things. The partner aspect, we have a very specific kind of partnerships as one of our legal entities here, and it's a relationship between two separate entities. That's a partnership, right? It's two legal entities that partner, and that was always it's similar to your view. And that's why I didn't like the term, but it's become kind of ubiquitous with being business oriented. So in some ways I've had to accept it, but I also think that you challenge that concept that finance is not part of the business. It is part of the business. And if we want to be a key part, we've got to be looked at as a, central, like the other departments are all central, like you defined it. So I like the way you approach that.
The other thing about it is that it elevates people who have finance business partner roles. It gives the impression that they are the people connected to the business and everyone else is just processing. We're just back office. And I think it gives us an unnecessary division. And I'm not saying that we ought not to have finance business partners, particularly in very large organizations where you can become disconnected. You need intentional points where you can plug in. But I think if you start elevating those people and saying, well, they are the face off to the business and the rest of us just stay behind the wall and just process stuff, it doesn't harness the power of the whole of finance to be business focused and to drive the business. So I think you really have to do a good job of describing what you mean so that you don't denigrate certain areas and elevate others, and appreciate everybody for what they can contribute.
Empathizing with what the organization needs and feels, because you don't want to stick out your chest and pound your chest because you're a finance business partner. But there is the concepts of that finance business partnering role that are absolutely essential, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
no, I think your perspective is really wise, and I think it's helpful to make sure we don't create these different levels of kind of importance, is maybe how I put it. You gave us 3 easy questions that would help us understand if we are a business-focused mindset. Can you remind us what those were and help us work through them?
This is the gist of it anyway, whether it's the exact 3 questions. But the gist of it is always asking yourself, like, how can I help the business? And then how does my role help the business? How can we as a finance team help the business? And I think at one stage, like in the talk last year, suggested, we all use the hashtag help the business, or, put it on a post-it note on our monitors so we see it every day. You put a screensaver, help the business, just to remind you that's what you're there for. And these kind of things, I know they're funny, but they do actually help you to remember, in this piece of work that I'm just doing for the next hour, how am I helping the business? How does that contribute? And then stop and ask the next question. If that's how I'm supposed to be helping the business, can that change the way I'm doing it to be more helpful?
Great question.
So help the business. How do I help the business? That's
I think you also wrapped around a question, and I really like, think of value, not cost, which relates to exactly what you're talking about. How do I create more value versus trying to reduce cost and be more efficient? How do I be more effective? And it wraps into some of the things you talked about earlier that I think are really important. So, great questions to ask, because it gets you out of that improve the finance function, which, okay, we want to do that, but improving the business is more important, right? So your whole message there is focus on the business. Don't put finance first, put the business first, and everything else will work itself out.
That question of value rather than cost is kind of applying the same logic to that finance question to the rest of the business, because finance people and accountants tend to have this habit of seeing the business as a cost construct, rather than something that actually does something and does something good for people called customers and shareholders and whatever. So I think it helps a lot to think in terms of value rather than just cost, because whatever you spend should be generating value. It should be generating a return. And if you can think in terms of that value, you start to think how other areas help the business. So, rather than thinking, what's my marketing cost? You think, well, how does marketing contribute to the value of the business?
And if you just a simple word changes like cost to investment, we've got, because we capitalize things and we're accountants and we understand expenses versus investment, and we kind of have this really dark line between cost and investment. And but the perception is very different. The difference between cost or expense and investment is different. And investment's a longer term decision-making thing, right? Cost is we're going to expense that this month. So they're great points. And I really appreciate you kind of, sharing that with us as well. You also mentioned 3 categories beyond mindset. So this idea that we're business focused rather than finance focused, that whole mindset, really important. And those questions you gave us, helpful. But you also said there's 3 other aspects beyond that can really, help to become a business-focused finance leader. Can you remind us what those were?
I kind of generated this kind of little catchphrase and talked about the mindset, skills, habits, and behaviors of business-focused finance. And we talked about the mindset. That's all about, it's the way you see things. It's the way you see things in terms of value and about helping the business rather than just cost and rather than just about what finance is doing. But then there's the skills, habits, and behaviors. And that comes down to those 3 legs of the stool I was talking about: business acumen, leadership, and tools and techniques. Or soft behavioral skills is what I call them rather than leadership. So it's business acumen, behavioral skills, and tools and techniques. you can see kind of the tools and techniques, that's about skills. And then business acumen and behavioral skills, that's about kind of habits and behaviors. It's the way that you go about things, and the way that you think about things, and the way that you apply those skills and experiences that you've got.
The business acumen part, and that becomes really important to this business. How have you achieved that business acumen? Do you have any examples in your past on how you were able to grow that part of your portfolio?
And I went and worked in a big bank, and I think I was reflecting on the fact that within, what was it, 3 and a bit years, I was finance director of that division, and at the age of 29. And I was kind of trying to work out, how did I get there? When I went in there, I saw my team in finance kind of standing off from the business. If they wanted to ask a question, they'd send an email, or they'd send it. I think back in those days, it might have been a memo, showing my age. And I used to say to them, why don't you just sit down with them once a week and go through the queries, rather than sending these query slips to them and then whining that you don't get a response? I got involved in an automation project, which meant that I had to understand the operation. And really, it was a unit costing project. So we had to baseline the unit cost and see what our unit cost would reduce to when we do the automation, bearing in mind that we also wanted to grow and create more capacity for what we were doing. I think a lot of people, a lot of FP&A professionals would see that as like an excuse to open up a new workbook in a spreadsheet and then tap away and then email it back to them and say, what do you think? There you go, I fulfilled your request. Whereas I approached it much more collaboratively, and I actually went and, yes, I created the spreadsheet, but I saw it as a team effort. I went to the operations director and the project manager and the marketing director, and I sat down and said, this is my model. Does it work to you if I put these variables through? And so we kind of knocked it into shape together. And that actually helped me to build relationships with those people that then meant, they came to me to ask more questions about pricing decisions and contract negotiations, customer profitability, and all sorts of things. And then we came to sell the business, and I'd picked up so much knowledge about the business that, again, I got to do the modeling to help sell the business. But then that got me into the projects meetings where we talked practicalities. Well, how do we do this business transfer? And I was putting my hand up going, yeah, what accounting system are we going to use? What payment system are we going to use? What payroll system are we going to use? Our contracts change. And and I was asking loads of detailed operational questions, not just about finance, but all the areas that touch finance. And guess what? No one knew the answer. So who's the one that gets to pick up the actions to find the answer? So that's how you end up being the one who knows everything about the business, because you bother to ask the questions that no one else wants to ask.
What a great example. Things you talk about being effective rather than efficient. It would have been much more efficient just to go do it yourself, sentiment, but to be effective long-term, creating those relationships, that collaboration is really good. So we can't have, a discussion, you and I, without Stephen Covey being brought up, but this effectiveness versus efficiency. And in this case, it'd be much easier for you to have, just done it yourself. But you created long-term value by building these relationships, getting them involved. And so Stephen Covey would say, fast is slow and slow is fast. And you definitely, use that approach in building those relationships. So you've got me hooked on the business focused finance leader for sure. Andy, thank you for joining me today.
Love talking with you. And it's always fun when we get together.
Thank you. That wraps up today's CFO Talk.